Good morning. It's my great pleasure on behalf of Jacobs to introduce Jacob Ellis, and not just because we have the same name. Jacob is a futurist, change maker, a youth activist, a policy maker, and really zeroing in on the issues of how do we create and sustain a future, a positive future for today and for the next generation. He holds a really impressive number of roles. He's a United Nations Generation Fellow for Future Generations. He's a UNICEF Youth Foresight Fellow. He's a Future Generations Global Ambassador, and he's a Director for External Relations and Culture at the Office for the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. He's also a Welsh speaker, and I wanted to try something here. I'm going to say, bore da, Koziol I Sydney. Mwyn heo har yr aeth. How'd I go? Good. I think what I said was, good morning, welcome to Sydney, enjoy the talk, but I might have just directed you to the bathroom. It's difficult to see. There's a lot of vowels to say. But in all seriousness, there's really only one topic that really matters at the moment, and that's intergenerational equity. Almost half of the world's population are under 25. So that's not a future problem, that's a problem that we need to be addressing today, and we've just heard about the challenges and strategies around addressing that in Sydney, whether that's housing affordability, mobility or culture. And we have the opportunity to be that bridge between the world we live in today and the one that we want to see in the future. And that's really what Jacobs is all about, and why Jacobs is keen to sponsor the event today, because Jacobs is all about solving the world's most critical problems so that we can live in a more sustainable tomorrow. It's the complex problem solving that we need to create thriving cities, move people around, get the business case right. And that problem starts right now today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Jacob Ellis. Please give him a round of applause.
Well, bore da, good morning. Your Welsh was perfect. Perhaps by the end of today's session, you too may join me in speaking a little bit of Welsh. So we'll test it. Bore da. Good. Well, you're slowly waking up. I too would like to acknowledge the land in which I stand on today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. We'll start, if I can get the tech to work. This is the part that I get nervous.
Let's start with a question. Do you believe everyone should have the same opportunity to a prosperous life, regardless of where they are born? If yes, then you believe everyone has the same moral worth, regardless of where they are born. This means each human has equal rights across space. Let's extend our thinking. Do you believe each human being has the same moral worth regardless of when they are born? That those born 6,000 years ago have lives just as worthy as those living today? If yes, then each human has equal rights across time. We now know that more people are likely to be born after us than have come before us. If each human has equal rights across time, then we have a duty to protect the rights of those in the generations that follow us. It's up to us to develop policy, to lead, and to problem solve with the interests of future generations in mind. There are a number of terms that people use when talking about future-oriented policymaking. These include intergenerational equity, intergenerational justice, and long-termism. But broadly speaking, it's all about considering the impact of our choices today on the lives of those in our future. This can be either through the impact on the later lives of today's young people, who are often left out of decision-making processes that affect their futures, or the impact on the generations who are yet to be born and are unable to advocate for themselves. We currently face many threats to our long-term prosperity as a global community, and in response to this, we now also find ourselves in the middle of a movement, already spanning almost 3 decades, to embed safeguards against these threats into national and global governance. This ranges from the Welsh Future Generations Commissioner to the UN Secretary General, who recently called for the appointment of a UN Special Envoy for Future Generations. These insightful approaches replicate the wisdom of indigenous communities as we emulate their long-held practices that protected and will continue to protect future generations. This global movement provides us with hope that we can become effective guardians for the future. But we must work with conviction, creativity, and collaborate across countries and generations to spread this approach around the world and make intergenerational justice a reality.
You're going to be looking at lots of questions today. You may have some questions of your own, but hopefully you'll indulge me in asking one more. What kind of Sydney do you want to leave forward for future generations? Notice the emphasis on the word forward. Traditionally, you may have been asked the question, what do you want to leave behind for future generations? But there's something far more personal, action-oriented in the word forward that I hope you will toy with as the day unfolds. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, and my thanks to the committee and to many of the names that all sat in the corner over there for the invitation to be with you today. I have spent various roles and various careers in addressing the injustices that we face in our communities, largely in the UK. But injustices that are not just within our borders, but across the world. Whether as a BBC journalist or a president of a students' union, people were at the heart of the decisions that I took. And I really wanted to amplify their voices, their stories, and address the problems that we faced. I was frustrated as a journalist. I was just speaking to one briefly a moment ago. I was frustrated that I wanted to do something about the problems that I was reporting on. So I joined UNICEF, I joined the UN Foundation, and ultimately the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner. And my role as a UN Foundation Next Generation Fellow, it would be remiss of me not to mention briefly the other 7 or so that join me as fellows around the world, and to highlight Claudette in particular, my double act. It feels quite empty here on stage, but Claudette and I occupy the space of future generations advocacy at the UN. The future is blank. Perhaps you can reflect on a word, a phrase, a paragraph, or even a PhD study or research that you may want to fill in that blank. But for me, the future is learning the lessons of Aberfan. Hands up if you've watched the Netflix The Crown series. Yeah? Good, there are fans of the royal family in the audience. Maybe another topic for another conference at another point. But Aberfan will be familiar to you if you have watched that series. Pictures like this are deeply personal, ingrained in my mind. I take you to the morning of the 21st of October, 1966. A few hours later in the day would have seen the children go ahead to their holidays, the half-term break, full of joy, full of aspirations for the week ahead, spending time in their local communities with friends. Tragically, unfortunately, what happened that morning was a coal tip number 7, came down the hill and engulfed a Skull Pantglas school, killing over 100 children. It is a deeply evocative image for us in Wales. My grandfather was one of those that left his rugby club. We'll talk about rugby later, perhaps. But left the rugby club to help take out the children at Aberfan. So it's a deeply evocative. Now, it didn't really strike me as of significance until I became a journalist, and later on in the work that I do at the Future Generations Commissioner, because this image, this day, is a reminder, an annual reminder of our lack of ability to act and think for the long term. Despite the echoes and the research and the data that called on action to be taken to prevent problems from occurring, communities were told it'll be okay, the tip won't come down the hill despite the weather conditions surrounding Aberfan on this particular occasion. And not listening to communities as well. So it's a deeply evocative image, and I'm tasked, my purpose, my mission in life is to ensure that tragics and tragedies like this don't occur, whether that's in Wales or across the world, and how we can apply long-termism, long-term governance to avoid these challenges as well. There are other things are prompting us. The video briefly touched on what came before, the fact that we've got the next 8 billion global population by 2083. Let's start thinking into those time cycles if we can. And where they're going to be born, largely in future majority countries in Asia and Africa. It's our collective responsibility to support these continents and these countries in particular with the resources, the creativity, the innovations to start thinking about their populations and our global humanity as well. I bring you with 2 minutes and 8 seconds to talk you through the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, a world-leading, groundbreaking piece of legislation that I have the pleasure of implementing in Wales. This is the most important slide, possibly, that I will show you. It's the architecture, if you like, of the legislation, that it is the duty placed on all our public institutions, whether you're the government, local government, health boards, national bodies like Sport Wales, the museums, Natural Resources Wales, that they have to apply the Sustainable Development Principle to act in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It is law in Wales to do this. It is not a nice to have. It is not something that you get to add on at the end of a policy decision. It has to be ingrained from the beginning. Through a national conversation in 2014, the Wales that we want, quite similar to some of the agenda topics of the committee, highlighted these 7 interconnected well-being goals. Some of you will see the quick translation to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Try and get my words out. And Wales is still the only country to have legislated on the back of the SDGs. So they're all equally important, these 7 goals. They each have definitions that are in law. You can't make them up. You have to do what the law says. And these are some of the bodies that are covered. So 46 currently, soon to be 56 national bodies. And we have 5 ways of working. I was speaking briefly to some colleagues who were sat in the front here, and the 5 ways of working was something that they remembered from a previous talk. And they're common sense, but again, the law states that they have to involve citizens or those affected by the decisions, integrate their policies, and work without silos and work with other agencies, think and act for the long term, to collaborate with others, and to seek to prevent problems from occurring or from getting worse. More information can be found via that QR code, because I knew I didn't have enough time to talk you through the full legislation, but hopefully in the questions that are to follow. And what can you do? I can give you 2 pieces of advice, one centered on the long-term nature of policy making, the other on rugby, but I won't have many friends in the audience if I remind you of the 40 points or so that we beat you in the World Cup, but we'll skim past that one for now. These are pieces of guidance, toolkits that you can use. One is a toolkit for policymakers or politicians. That's a podcast that we worked with Foundations for Tomorrow, based here in Australia, as it happens, to develop that toolkit. And then a youth mobilizer or a accelerator for young people. And I'm pleased that over 1,000 young people have taken that free online course, a majority from the Global South. Leave you then with this call to action. Please, please, please do what you can to recognize that this is an important subject. The fact that you're in the audience today, you're already doing that. Become good ancestors, good leaders for the future. Understand that you have a personal responsibility not only for your constituents alive today and your clients and those that you serve, but actually for those yet to be born. Understand what governance mechanisms, either in your own companies and organizations, but my hope, and I've got 13 days to try and convince them, is the local government partners here in Sydney, and to implement and to monitor the long-term decisions. So I asked you at the beginning, what kind of Sydney do you want to leave forward for future generations? My hope is that we've unpicked some of the what, some of the how we might achieve that, and I'm hoping in the 8 minutes that I now get to answer questions, we get to unpick that even more. So diolch, thank you.
Hello. Oh, it is on. Thank you, Jacob. My name is Michael Koziol. I'm the city editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask a few more little questions, and you also can ask your own question if you want on the Slido. I will try to get to it, I promise. Jacob, one thing that I was kind of struck by in that is that in Wales, the requirement is not just that you have a look at and provide feedback on a piece of legislation, tax reform or something. It's pretty much every decision from a whole range of public bodies. If someone wants to, replace a pop plant in Wales, they have to consult you. Is that really? It's quite a large scope.
It is a big piece of work, and it covers every policy area, as you say. So every government minister has responsibility to think about each of those 7 goals. So no longer is it the case that the health minister alone is responsible for the healthier Wales, but actually the education minister, the culture minister have as much responsibility in that particular area of work. And it's not just in policy space as well, and there are great examples within the policy landscape. No doubt we'll touch on the impact of the legislation soon, but also on the process side of things. We call them the corporate areas of change, also articulated in the legislation that covers things like the budgetary cycle, procurement. You can't buy anything if you're one of those public bodies without being able to articulate how you've been able to consider both the 7 well-being goals and the 5 ways of working as well. So yeah, every facet is covered.
And so in the basically 10 years since this was conceived of and then eventually set up, what's sort of been your biggest, intervention, I suppose, or the one that you think was the most sort of significant?
I think I'd take you back to 2018, 2019. The Welsh Government at the time had a manifesto commitment, a policy commitment to build a relief road to relieve congestion issues on the largest motorway that we have in South Wales. And it was going to cost £1.4 billion. As it happens, it was going to be going through a national nature reserve. And we felt that it wasn't in the best interest of future generations to build a road. I understand you have similar kind of conundrums, but when you build a road...
We have a few road projects around town. Yeah.
You build a road, you fill it, and you just continue to have congestion problems, and you don't solve the root causes. And we intervened on the basis that people in that local area didn't even own a car, so this wasn't going to benefit a more equal Wales. The National Nature Reserve being one of the important things, air pollution, decarb agenda, and we successfully managed alongside grassroots communities and organisations to reverse the policy decision, which later has transpired that no road building takes place in Wales unless you can advocate for future generations, and the record level of investment into public transport and local and active travel. So that's probably one of the biggest ones.
And you would have caused a few stirs along the way, I imagine.
Yeah.
Tell us about.
Well, culture change takes time, and despite this being a people's act, for want of a better way of describing it, that comes with its challenges when you're trying to convince people that what you're doing today, you may not feel the benefit of. You may not feel the benefit of it at all, but your grandchildren and your children will. The hope is that takes place. And we have communities who petition governments to reverse some of these more radical, brave, transformative decision-making policies. But I live in a country where at least we ask those questions about what type of world we want to leave behind and what kind of Wales do we want to achieve. But we know that this can be difficult, and it takes leadership, and it takes bold action. It takes communicating with and alongside communities, not doing things to them, but doing things with them. But we think we're on the right track, and culture change is going to take time.
And tell us a bit more about how it works, because you don't have the right to veto a decision, right? But you've sort of got yourself into a position where if you say we don't think this is a good idea, you're listened to, right? How does that all sort of play out typically? Yeah,
the phrase in the legislation talks that the commissioner is the guardian of the interests of future generations. It's quite Marvel-esque in that sense, the type of superhero that I want to be. But the commissioner doesn't have the power to stop or to veto decisions. It can't tell a public body what to do, but it can challenge, and it can ask for the evidence. It can name and shame the public body that may have not aligned with the piece of legislation. In fact, we are the second country to have a commissioner. Israel had the first. Israel's commissioner had the power to veto, and the government decided to get rid of that particular role.
Right.
So it's
as politicians sometimes want to do.
You get those challenges, right? But I think that the intervention on the M4 is another example where you can get governments to change their mind with the soft power that we have because of the movement building that you have around that. So. Yeah.
And did that soft power exist from day one? Or I imagine you sort of have to, like any new force or organization, you sort of have to build up that cultural clout, or was it sort of vested in you from the very beginning?
Well, I think Wales has a proud history of applying sustainable development in its legislation. The first fair trade nation, part of the Rio Agreement. We have quite a good grounding in sustainable development, in progressive policy making. We've had the same political party in government, with various other parties along our 20 years of devolution, but that has come with some stability, some political consensus in that period. And this is the political party, therefore, that introduced the legislation. So no political party wants to be the one that has to be investigated or challenged by the commissioner on a policy or a piece of law that they enacted. That has therefore enabled us, I think, to bring them along that journey. But I think we've moved quite quickly. A universal basic income pilot, a national forest, a new curriculum with climate change and racial justice at the heart. I think that those are things that take some governments way over 10 years to introduce, and we've managed to do that in the first 10.
Yeah. And so Israel was the first, Wales the second. And tell us about how this sort of idea of, guardians of future generations is proliferating to other countries. It is, isn't it?
Yeah, and here in Australia, there's an all-party parliamentary group for future generations. You have committees for the future across the world. Gibraltar, Canada, New Zealand, Norway are other examples where this piece of legislation is starting to trickle through. And there's a wide spectrum. That podcast, one of those QR codes, will take you to a conversation that you can have an independent commissioner, a piece of legislation on one side of the spectrum, or maybe introducing a future generations report or a future trends report every 5 years. Those are things that you can do to elevate the discussion. But maybe the thing that I'm mostly proud of, and our hope is that we will achieve this by September, is that the UN is looking to introduce a declaration for future generations and a UN special envoy for future generations, as the video earlier discussed and prompted to, in the hope that that then will become the catalyst for other countries to take forward to.
Right, and now you mentioned that we've got, we've got a parliamentary committee or something in Canberra.
Group.
Now, that I don't know, I think that's just them sit around in Parliament House and, discuss ideas over afternoon tea or something. Well, it probably doesn't have as much teeth as you think we need to give a body like that, right?
But I think that, again, you're trying to change the mindset, and to have politicians in the room who are willing to even ask the question. I think that you are give them a disservice in probably suggesting that they are not there with the right intentions. But I think that every big change starts somewhere, and I give full weight and support to that parliamentary group who may start there, but with the bigger ambition to having. And I mean, the example in Finland, they had a committee for the future. I think 7 of their last 10 or 12 prime ministers have gone on to have come from that committee. So I think that has something to say about give your backing to the all-party parliamentary.
And I mean, I suppose one of the kind of foundational point of a future generations commission is to say that, people who have a stake in the outcome of a certain policy should have a particular say over that policy. I know that you followed the recent debate that we had here about the voice, which was based on a sort of similar principle. You have a stake in this, you get special input into it. What did you make of how that played out? Obviously, we know the result.
Well, I think that I can take us back to the 5 ways of working that we have in the legislation, and involvement being the most important principle, possibly, of the 5. Because you have to bring people along a journey with you, and you have to listen to communities. And you have to understand power dynamics, and you have to understand that if you want to change a system, you ultimately have to listen to communities. And we talk about involvement rather than consultation or engagement, because involvement is a far more personal kind of attention. So I think, despite the outcome, I think politicians have to find different ways of engaging with communities. And it might have gone down a one particular route, but the proof will be in the pudding into what else might come instead. And my full support to anyone that seeks to put the involvement principle as the heart of their decision making.
And just lastly, like, what does involvement look like when you guys do it? When you kind of want to understand what do young people, or what do parents or whoever it is that you're sort of trying to gauge, how do they feel about this issue that's coming up? How do you sort of go about that involvement?
I think it's about going to where people are rather than expecting them to come to you. I mean, there's a whole range of research that will point you to different technological kind of innovations in this space. We have a set of national indicators and milestones that track the measurement and the progress of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which gets published in the Wellbeing of Wales report annually. And one of the indicators isn't about voter turnout or how many people sign a petition or whatever. It's about how do people influence local decisions. And that is about citizenship locally rather than about national voter turnout or election cycles. So I think that we do the think tanks and bring the different organizations together, but ultimately it's about giving away the power and enabling communities to take action.
Giving away power. That is a radical idea indeed, but probably one that should be taken up more often. Thank you so much, Jacob. Could you please thank Jacob Ellis? Thank you.